Awesome. All right, I'm delighted to introduce our faculty for this program. Julie Carmine serves as a senior educator and the manager of national teacher programs for the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. She has developed and implemented professional development programs for educators nationally and internationally, on site and online. She and her team produced the National Gallery's two massive open online courses for teachers, teaching critical thinking through art with the National Gallery of Art on the EDX platform, serving over 30,000 participants since its launch in 2019. Teaching Complex Thinking Through Art recently launched this spring of 2024. She also leads annually the Summer Institute for Educators, a convening of educators around ideas of integrating art into pedagogy, most recently exploring the role of art in supporting social emotional learning. Julie first became aware of Project Zero research and pedagogies as an arts and education master's student at the Harvard Graduate School of Education and has found powerful applications in both the classroom and museum. So thank you, Julie, for joining us.
Thank you so much, Mark. What a nice introduction. Thank you.
And then I'd like to introduce Heidi Heinish, our second presenter for the evening. She has worked as the museum educator and manager at the National Gallery of Art for more than 30 years, currently serving as head of gallery and studio learning. Heidi's educational work has been inspired by research at Harvard University's Project Zero, especially those initiatives that foreground critical thinking, active learning, and social justice. She's a regular faculty member at the Project Zero Summer Classroom and the Washington International School's Summer Institute for Teachers. In her spare time, Heidi loves to play with her dog, Pink, and teach fitness classes. She is originally from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and has received her Bachelor's of Art in German Studies from Temple University and a Master's in Art History from George Washington University. Thanks for joining us, Heidi.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, of course. Well, I'll turn it over to the two of you to get started for the evening.
Great, thanks.
Great. Thank you, Mark. So good evening, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for spending this time with us to do some exploration together into photography around the theme of the Civil War. So our theme today, our title is Using Thinking Routines to Integrate Photography into Civil War History Lessons and Beyond. And we thought I can see that a number of you have already put some introductions in the chat. It's great to see where you're coming from within Texas and the different grade levels and subjects you teach. So we thought for an icebreaker, since you've already added some of that to the chat, we're also wondering if you could share, if you could travel anywhere on vacation, where would you go? It's been a cold winter for us. I'm ready to take a vacation. I don't know about you guys, but where would you go? And also, if you haven't had a chance to write in the chat where you're joining us from or subject levels, we'd love to hear from you. The other thing is we've made our program today really interactive, and we welcome you to unmute yourself and just share right on the mic your responses. So if you want to unmute and share out where you want to go on your next vacation, just to get us thinking about the world and all the beautiful places there are for travel. Nice. Tiffany would like to go to Hawaii. Sign me up too, Tiffany. I would love to join. Leslie wants to go to Scotland. Sylvia would love to go to Rome. Nice. Shauna is sharing she likes to go to Australia. So many places I'd also love to go and have not been yet. Oh, Senegal or Argentina from Kathleen. Coming to us
Barcelona. Julie, I see that Mona wants to go to Barcelona. Oh, that I agree. That's pretty special. Japan, another vote for Hawaii.
Love Japan. So fun. Well, I also see a few plans that are already in the making. Someone's sharing they're going to Alaska. Ed is sharing he's going to Alaska this July. Nice. Well, hopefully you have some nice travel plans coming up sometime in 2025. It's always nice to have that to look forward to and even to just dream about. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you for all the things you're sharing in the chat. It's really great to hear or to read here where you're coming from, and all the different things you're working on. I see we have a PhD student, also a teacher, but simultaneously PhD student focused on the Western theater of the Civil War. So cool. Thank you, Emily, for sharing that. Okay, so we have a couple guiding questions to help us sort of navigate through our program together. The first one is, how might looking at photography help students more deeply understand the Civil War and its aftermath? And then how might a thinking routine provide scaffolding to unpack these photographs and promote thinking? So we will revisit these later on, but those are the questions that kind of guided Heidi's and my planning and preparation of this program. So to dive into those questions, we're going to do a few things. First, we're going to engage with a contemporary and an historical photograph using the connection making thinking routine called See, Wonder, Connect. And we're going to explore various types of Civil War photography. Then we will reflect together on how the thinking routine and integration of photography could be applied in your teaching context. And Heidi and I at the end will also share about some of the National Gallery's programs and resources for teachers and answer any questions that you might have. So we also wanted to mention that some of the content of our program today is dealing with war and the outcomes of war, including death and loss of life. And so we just wanted to preview that for you and encourage you to engage in whatever capacity is comfortable for you. We also have designed this to be very interactive. And so we're relying on you to share your thoughts and ideas throughout the program. And we welcome you to put those ideas in the chat, or we're enough of a smallish group of 22 that we can also just unmute ourselves and share right out if you'd like. So if that's your style, feel free to just contribute right on the mic. So with that, we're going to go ahead and get started, and I'll pass the baton to Heidi.
All right, thank you, Julie. And I just want to say thank you all for coming out tonight. This was a really interesting topic to research and to engage with. Julie and I, we were both like fascinated, so we're excited to like kind of explore these images with you. And I will say that we're going to look at a lot of different images today, but we're going to take a deeper dive into two of them. And this is the first of two. So Julie, if you want to pull our image up. All right, so I want to invite you to take a close, careful look at this photograph. And we're going to spend just a moment looking at it in its entirety. And then my colleague Julie is going to zoom in different parts so that you can see more of the detail. So we're just going to be, quietly just take a really careful look, making some mental notes about like what's getting your attention as you look. But for right now, it's just looking. So maybe you move your eye from one side of the image to the other, maybe reading across from right to left or left to right. Maybe you look at the top edge of the image and let your eyes slowly scroll down to the bottom. You might start in the foreground, kind of noticing what's closest to us. Let your eyes move back into the image. What do you notice as it sort of transitions in that middle portion? New things you're noticing. Letting your eyes move up to the top. Third of the painting, what do you notice in the corners, the edge? Julie, if you want to dig into some of those, there you go. You just read my mind. So she's just zooming into the center. What new things do you notice? Julie, do you want to zoom in a little more to some of the wooded spaces? They're some of the hardest to read in this photograph. Thank you. Yeah, maybe reading across a little bit from side to side. Every time I look at this, I see something new. Thank you. All right, maybe just one more quick pass, and then we'll go back to the full image. Just want to give you a chance to see as much as you possibly can. Thank you, Julie. Sorry, that's my dog Pink that you heard about in my introduction. Okay, Julie, if we can go to the next slide, please. All right, so I want to invite you now to maybe just take a moment to either jot down on a piece of paper nearby or just make some mental notes of 4 things that you noticed as you looked at this photograph. Just what really stood out for you. Think about it. If you can identify 4 things that, like, oh, I will remember this about this photograph. Then choose one of those 4 things and either unmute and just like raise your hand, we'll call on you, or drop it in the chat. We want to create a kind of visual inventory of the image before we start to kind of move into some of the information or interpretation around it. So I'd love to know, what did you see as you looked at this work of art?
I'm noticing what looks like some turned up ground that could potentially be a trench and some newer trees. The tree second from the left has some damage towards the bottom. So this could be a witness tree. A couple trees over, it's definitely a newer tree.
Thank you so much. Like noticing sort of the grounds that takes up almost half of this photograph. It's a bit churned up a little bit, suggesting maybe there might be a trench in some points. And then also noticing the qualities of the trees, that some of the trees are smaller, thinner, could certainly be a newer tree. And then the damage at the bottom of the second tree from the left, right? Okay, thank you. I also see in the chat, there's clarity of the bark on the tree. Yeah, I really noticed that, Julie, as you were zooming across, like you can really see that bark well. And then tall trees without underbrush, clearing in the front, and someone in the background. Interesting. Rachel here suggests the picture might be taken from inside a shelter because there is shadowing on both sides in the bottom. Like, so there was like a kind of peephole that's sort of framing the image we see. And if you know, look around the corner, especially in that upper left corner, there's a really dark space there. And then I noticed that along the bottom right and left as well. It's a little less obvious in the upper right. But yeah, I totally can imagine that. There's definitely some shading around those corners and kind of wondering why, how did that happen? Other observations? Anything else that you're noticing? Ed shares many linear shapes going to the right. He also has a question mark, bullets and shells. Mona noticed white streaks. Sylvia has a question, which happens, right? The more you look, the more you wonder. Is there a road there? I wonder if that, if I could, right here, let's see if we can see my pointer, you may be right in here, because there's a little differentiation between the ground here and this space right here. Oh, in the middle right. Okay. Oh, like right here. Oh, I see. Okay, thank you. Uh, yes, yes, there. Okay, thank you, Sylvia. Any other observations you'd like to share? I think you guys have done it like an amazing job already. Oh, there's a wagon in the background. So we've seen a person in the background, a wagon, maybe a road, maybe a trench. We're noticing how the trees are different. There's a sort of bareness around the base of the trees. Right. Thank you all so much for sharing what you noticed. I'd like to sort of acknowledge that every detail that you noticed is a choice made by the artist, right? It's the way they frame the image, it's what they choose to photograph, it's what they highlight with their various processes. So you've already begun to develop, I think, a rich body of information about this work of art. And so I just want to build on that. The title of this work of art is Cold Harbor Battle, and it was made by the American photographer Sally Mann. Sally Mann is known for creating large format black and white photographs that feature subjects close to her, including her family and the rural landscapes of the American South. In 2001, Sally Mann began a project to photograph Civil War battlefields, starting in Antietam and moving on to many others across Virginia. This photograph was taken at the battlefield of Cold Harbor, but any trace of fighting or death is conspicuously absent from the photo. So I'd like to share a little bit with you about the Battle of Cold Harbor. It was not one that I was familiar with, and if you all may be as social studies teachers, but I'll share a little bit of what I learned. It certainly is remembered as one of the war's most dramatic and decisive engagements. For the next slide, Julie, please. Cold Harbor, Virginia is located about 10 minutes northeast of Richmond. And so I think you can kind of see it like right here, just a little bit to the right and up from the city of Richmond. And the battle took place between May 31st and June 12th, 1864. So it was a 2-week engagement. And sadly, during that period, more than 18,000 soldiers were killed, wounded, or captured. At the start of the battle, General Grant had ordered repeated attacks against the entrenched Confederate troops. The approach culminated in a bloody battle on June 3rd, when nearly 7,000 Union forces were gunned down in less than an hour. The dead and injured were left on the field for 4 days until arrangements were made to be able to retrieve the bodies. Julie, you want to go to the next slide? Thank you. Grant later admitted that he always regretted that assault at Cold Harbor, that it was ever made. He wasn't one to apologize, I don't think, but this was one instance where he felt that, he had made a bad decision. It's also important to note that this was a loss for the Union Army, and it was General Lee's last large-scale battlefield victory. So let's come back to the image. And I want to ask you another question about it, kind of building on all of the things you noticed, the little bit that I shared. What does this work of art make you wonder? What puzzles or questions are bubbling up? Oh, Emily, thank you for sharing. Thousands lost. He kept throwing men at the small break of the Confederate line. Yikes. He learned from this and was able to take Petersburg without such a loss of life. It's a hard lesson. Emily, one of Grant's worst defeats, Ed writes, terrible violence. General Grant lost hundreds in just a few hours. In fact, one account that I read said that, 6,000 people were lost in 20 minutes. Are there any marks in the tree left over from the war? Great question, especially as we were looking at that bark so closely. I wondered about that, if there's any evidence, or as someone described a witness tree, any evidence of the war in this site currently? It was painted, or excuse me, this particular photograph was taken in 2001. Casualties would be 6,000 wounded and killed combined. How much blood fertilized this soil? Really profound question, Kathleen. Other questions or puzzles that are coming to mind? Ed writes, like other naturally beautiful locations in the Civil War, would suffer terrible destruction, both environment and human cost. Staggering as the war would go on for another year. Yeah. Yeah. Would this be a burial ground for those killed? Shauna asks. All right, Julie, do you want to go to the next slide? We just wanted to dig in a little more to this wondering question. And we're wondering, like, what might be the main story of this photograph? And what might be a hidden or untold story? So often when we look at images, we're confronted with what's right in front of us, but like works of art are complex and layered. And I think this photograph is no different. So I'm curious what you think maybe the main story is here, but what might be other stories that could be told with this image? Maybe just stepping back from the frame and looking into the image. Who might be present? What might be some of the other stories here? Julie, do any thoughts spring to mind for you?
For me, a main story of this photograph is the bullets, that I feel these lines are kind of like, for me, they're metaphors of bullets in this war.
Julie,
So
do you
for
mean
me,
like the stripes, the sort
the
of
stripes, the
okay.
streaks?
Yeah, interesting. It does
Yeah,
sort
so
of
for
suggest that.
me, yeah, it's very I mean, it's just what I'm seeing in it. For me, the main story is the battlefield and the intensity and greatest danger of battle.
Yeah. In the chat, Kathleen wrote, the families of those involved in this battle have their descendants come to visit. Yeah.
That could be like a hidden story,
Yeah.
perhaps. Who are those families? What are their stories?
Yeah, thank you. Sylvia writes, it's an eerie photograph. It seems so quiet, yet so mysterious. Yeah, I think there's probably a lot of stories that could be derived from this image. Thank you for that. I'm going to just build on some of the things you've shared. Kathleen writes, the scene could be anywhere. How many other battlefields lie calmly bereft? There are many known, but how many have been forgotten? Yeah, that's an amazing thought. Thank you. Well, reflecting on her battlefield photos, if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide, please, Julie. Sally Mann wrote, quote, and I think this 6:27 p.m. This really resonates with, I think, some of the things that you all wrote in the chat. Sally Mann wrote, in this particular place of stilled time, the spirit seemed to drift up in the ground fog rising from the fields. Wispily, it wrapped around our tent in the eerie gloaming hour, while my pup and I bedded down for the night. Lying down on my stomach with the tent flap up, surveying the timeless landscape, I wondered how many of these vistas were the final vision for closing eyes. Thank you. And so with that, I would like to talk a little bit about Cold Harbor and the photographic process. To make the battlefield image, Sally Mann used the same photographic processes employed by Civil War photographers, including folks like Matthew Brady, or Timothy O'Sullivan, whose work we'll see in just a moment. Julie, could you go to the next slide, please? Thank you. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here, but I did want to just note some important pieces of information about this photographic process that I think is whether you're a photographer or not would be interesting and relevant. And we're going to give you this slide that has sort of an in-depth description of the photographic process that Civil War photographers used. But I just want to highlight that in order to create battlefield photographs, photographers had to bring everything with them. And the process they used, this wet plate process, was complicated and technical and unforgiving. So it would have been hard enough to do in a studio, but to do this on the battlefield, they had to bring their own darkroom. They had to bring heavy glass plates, really big cameras, and all sorts of chemicals that they would use to process the photographs. The negatives had to be prepared, exposed, and developed within minutes before the emulsion dries. So they had to be super quick and super precise. Usually the negatives were coated with a varnish to protect the surface after they were developed, and then they were printed on paper and mounted. So there's a lot of things that happen in between. I'm not going to read every bullet, but you'll have this PowerPoint to reference later. So I'm going to turn it over to Julie now to talk a little bit more about Civil War photography.
Thanks, Heidi. So we wanted to also share a little bit about just kind of an overview of some of the subjects and the context. So in this time when the nation was incredibly divided over the issue of slavery, artists helped to shape people's understandings of the conflict that overtook the nation. And the Civil War was actually the first American war to be documented through photography. Many artists captured various subjects of the war. And I wanted to sort of share and go through a few of the types of subjects and build on Heidi's information about the processes as well. So many artists captured various people who were involved in the abolitionist movement and also the soldiers on both sides. Two popular types of portraits were the carte de visite, also known as cabinet cards, which were photographs mounted on cardstock paper and traded among friends and networks, similar to a business card today. Then there was also the tin type, and that's an image that was mounted on an iron plate. And there are a few examples of these that we've put here on the slide. On the left, you'll see Sojourner Truth, who, as I'm sure you're very familiar with, was an advocate and influencer, if we use today's terminology, for the abolitionist movement. And she's shown here on a carte de visite. So her portrait, in addition to others like that of Frederick Douglass, was duplicated and then spread widely to encourage people to join the cause of fighting against slavery and for freedom. Many soldiers were also able to have their portraits made before leaving for war because of the tintype process, which emerged in Paris and then the US in the 1850s and was very inexpensive and easy to make. So it made photography accessible to the everyday person. Tintypes became most popular during the Civil War, but then they were displaced soon after by the carte de visite. So other photographers also captured the battle itself and the battlefield, bringing the emotional toll of war home in really immediate ways, as we see on the example that's in the middle of the slide here. Other photographers depicted the political figures, the key locations, the regiments, and the various events that drove and reflected the conflict. So one prominent photographer of the era, Matthew Brady, photographed Lincoln after he won the Republican nomination for president, and his image was published on the cover of the popular magazine Harper's Weekly, with reproductions or lithographs sold by the thousands by Currier and Ives. And Brady believed that his image had a significant influence on Lincoln's winning the election. Many of Brady's and his team's photographs were published in 1911, long after the war ended, in the Photographic History of the Civil War. So you may have heard of that. It's a 10-volume tome full of thousands of photographs of the Civil War. So the images produced by the major photography studios were the public's first exposure to seeing dead soldiers. And they made very clear the high cost of war. So some viewers considered them unmediated and really the only true records of the war that could be relied upon. However, many artists actually chose their subjects deliberately and carefully composed their photographs, sometimes even altering the scenes slightly from their original state to create a more powerful photo. So our present-day understanding of the Civil War is often driven by the photography of the people and the places and the events of this period. So what we're going to do next is look at another photograph and go through those see and wonder steps together, just like we did with the Sally Mann photo. And this is going to be a photograph from Civil War times.
Hey, Julie, there were a couple of questions in the chat. And
Oh, sure. Let's pause for a second and check those out.
Yeah, so Emily here wrote, this is why there are no close photographs of the battle. They're all of camp life or when the battle is over. And Mona noticed, that's a lot of stuff to carry. It doesn't surprise me then that it's the aftermath. And so there was a little bit written about that we read, that at first, like Matthew Brady, when he went to some of the early battles, like he was like, oh yeah, I'm going to go and I'm going to take pictures of the battles. And he realized quite quickly it's way too dangerous. And so, and also these camera processes required a long exposure. So being able to capture like a momentary event was really, really hard to do. So that's why most of the images are either before or after, when things can be still and things can be controlled. So I just wanted to kind of share that. I also wanted to add something. Julie, you noticed like the sort of streaks, and several of you noticed the streaks across Sally Mann's photograph, and they were actually not bullets, but actually the streaks were caused by the process. The process was complicated and difficult, and so it's actually the streaks, and it's very, it's definitely very evocative of like war, and it creates, some dynamism in the photograph, which is so still. But they were caused by sort of defects of the process. So anyway, I just wanted to share those and clear up those questions. Thanks, everybody.
All right, so let's look at this next photograph together. So go ahead and let your eyes kind of scan over the image here. Consider what you're noticing. Consider the textures. the composition, the colors, the subject. I'll zoom in just a little bit here. It's somewhat graphic. Zooming back out. And similarly to what we did before, if you would just take a few minutes and jot down maybe 4 or so things that you're noticing as you look at the photograph. And then when you're ready, if you could just add 1 or 2 things that you see here into the chat or share on the mic, we would love to bring to the surface all of our observations.
These soldiers have obviously been deceased for a while. Their bodies have already started to decompose and bloat. Some of them actually have like the gangrenous fingers. I noticed that all of them have had their shoes stolen. So this was probably during a point in the war. These look like they're probably Union soldiers because they had much better shoes, and Confederates like to steal the shoes off of Union soldiers because they were better made in factories. So they would pick over them, and I see none of them have their haversacks or their guns. So those have been probably stolen and picked off.
Thank you for sharing that, Emily. Yeah, Leslie's also adding the bodies look bloated, like they've been there for a little while. The grass looks trampled down across the whole field. Sylvia is also commenting on how bloated the bodies look. Mona asking, she was wondering also if they were posed in a line. Seems kind of weird that they would be shot this way.
Mona, with the war tactics of the time, the way they're fallen in a group could be accounted for several different ways. They would fire in a line towards the beginning of the war, so you could actually have several men hit at once, like near each other. But one of the biggest things that would take a group down would be when cannons are firing grape shot. So it comes out, think of like a shotgun shell, and you can actually mow down a whole line in one shot.
Thank you, Emily, for sharing that. And Ed also adds that it brings in Drew Gilpin Faust's work on what would be considered the good death eventually returned, and the bad death where bodies are simply buried with any markings. Extremely difficult content that must be taught and shared. Thank you. Yes. Sylvia, their faces look swollen. There's Kathleen shares their stained shirts, blood coming up from the pants in the front. Definitely a difficult image to look at. Let's move to wonder. And a few questions are already coming up as we're looking carefully and observing and noting what we see. So what else does this work of art make you wonder? What questions does this bring up for you? Yeah, so how long have these men been left there? I wonder, like, who's going to tend to them, tend to their bodies and give them a proper burial? Do they have identification on them? These are some wonderings that are coming up for me. Kathleen is sharing, when do these men get buried? Yes. And how do they track who died so that their families could be told? Kathleen, we're thinking the same things. Shauna is sharing, what's the purpose of this picture? Was it meant for many people to see it? And Sylvia shared, why were they placed there? Ed is asking, who will do the burying? Black soldiers or the aides? Was it really overwhelming for people? Kathleen is wondering, Kathleen is sharing maybe the carry-on animals would come. Okay. Yeah, the image and really just having a moment to consider our questions is really bringing us inside this scene and thinking about, like, what is it really like here in this moment, and what comes next. Emily's wondering, where on the Gettysburg battlefield was this taken? Any other questions you would like to share? So another couple of questions for you, as we did before with the contemporary photograph by Sally Mann. Curious about your thoughts. What might be the main story that this photograph reveals? And then what might be some hidden or untold stories around it? Leslie's asking, was this published? And did family members see it? Mm. So as we shared before, some of those hidden stories could be the family members, people who are outside of the frame of the photograph, who might be incredibly impacted by what happened here.
I'm also thinking about the photographer, Julie, and sort of like their choices, their experience there. It must have smelled awful. Like it just it I mean, I was also, thinking about like who would do the burials and stuff, but I'm just wondering about the photographer and like their process and their thoughts as they, brought this information back to, the American public. Mm.
Absolutely. That would be like a hidden story outside the frame. What was the photographer's experience? And Sylvia shared she's been thinking about the smell too. And Emily shares, I noticed that there's something between the two men in the foreground. Was it their regimental flag? Is that why so many died here? Were they the color bearers? Hmm. And Shauna shares, curious how other soldiers who may have survived felt about fellow soldiers being photographed. Hmm. And Ed shares, which day of the 3-day conflict for this photo, who was counting corpses, etc., for the Union soldiers during July 1st through the 3rd. And then Kathleen shares, what was the normal routine with the dead? It takes time to bury, but if the battle continues, can you really go back? Oh, thank you all for sharing your thoughts and questions about this image. I'd like to share with you a little more about it. Some of you are already familiar with some of the context. but this photograph was made by Timothy H. O'Sullivan and is titled Field Where General Reynolds Fell, Gettysburg, July 5th, 1863. It is an albumen print, and so that an albumen print is made of egg white and silver nitrate. The artist, O'Sullivan, was Irish born, and he began his photography career as an apprentice in Matthew Brady's gallery in New York, and then moved on to the Washington, D.C. branch, managed by Alexander Gardner. In 1861, at the age of 21, O'Sullivan joined Brady's team of Civil War photographers. But when Gardner and Brady parted ways, O'Sullivan joined Gardner, and he worked for him until the end of the war. So several of O'Sullivan's images were included in Gardner's photographic sketchbook of the war. And that's a 2-volume opus of 100 original photographs each. And you may have heard of that also. So General John Fulton Reynolds was a career U.S. Army officer, and he played a key role in committing the Union Army of the Potomac to the Battle of Gettysburg. He was killed at the start of the battle, likely by a sharpshooter, on July 1st, 1863, the very first day of that 3-day battle. And O'Sullivan took this photograph on July 5th. So that was after the war had concluded, and it was also the day after the general had his own burial in his hometown of Lancaster, Pennsylvania. So O'Sullivan built his reputation on images that conveyed the destructive power of modern warfare. So he actually took a number of battlefield photographs. So that's a little bit of information. Some of our questions will linger, and we can just continue to ponder those. We don't have every answer here for every question that we've asked, but those questions have certainly taken us deeper into the history, into imagining and empathizing with even those outside of the frame here. So with that, I'd like to move to the last step of our thinking routine, See, Wonder, Connect. And Heidi will lead us in that one.
Right. Thank you, Julie. And thank you all for your really, really thoughtful questions and comments and sharing your knowledge. We really appreciate that. All right. So we are going to take a look at these 2 images side by side. Our first image by Sally Mann from the, early 20th century, and then the photographic image of a more in the moment battlefield image from the Civil War period. And we just wanted to invite you to kind of take a close look at both, and what connections can you make between these images? What are some of the similarities, some of the differences that you're noticing between them? And I think what I'm trying to when I think about that question, I'm wondering, what does a contemporary image of a Civil War battlefield bring to our understanding of the Civil War? How does it connect with images from the day? Open ground in both, still life, quite literally. Thank you, Kathleen. Connection of time between spaces. Thank you, Shauna. Sylvia writes, this season, everything is dead on the ground. There's no grass. I'm definitely thinking about cropping and the way like in which the photographer like framed that image. Like I think it's interesting that the treetops are cut off and then all we see is the sort of bare trunks or mostly just the bare trunks. Ed writes, these locations are also rich in forest, meadows, hard to maneuver, and now wide open spaces of death, almost a pre-post view of the environment from the horrors of war, human death at high numbers. Thank you. It's taken away from the landscape as a result of this. Thank you. All right, I just want to kind of wrap us up a little bit with a few thoughts. Oh, Kathleen writes, a healing question mark. The trees continue to grow question mark. Thank you for that. I think that's a nice way to sort of bring us into sort of some of the last pieces of information that I'd like to share with you. We've talked a lot about Civil War photography over the last hour, and so I just wanted to kind of summarize a few of those thoughts. The Civil War was the first major conflict, as we know, to be extensively documented through photography. There were millions of Civil War portraits made, but only about 10,000 documentary photographs were taken during the Civil War. The photographers only photographed dead soldiers where they lay on the field on 9 occasions. And Southern photographers were actually took the first documentary photos of the war, but most of the Civil War images were made by Northern photographers. They just had better access to the equipment and the chemicals and the process. And I know I spoke earlier about the sort of difficulty and time-consuming wet plate photographic process and how challenging it was, especially to do that in the field. But there were some real benefits to using this process as well. The wet plate photographic process, as Julie talked about the albumin print, and then somebody mentioned in the chat about the ambrotypes, allowed for the infinite reproduction of an image through prints and engravings. And so that was really created a lot of possibility for not just a few people to see these images, but for tens of thousands of people to see these images. Also, something that I thought was absolutely fascinating was that the wet plate negatives produced a higher resolution than modern cameras. So that was fascinating. In the years following the end of the war, artist depictions reflected a new vision in which all men were to be free and equal. And even now, contemporary artists still grapple with these themes. So Julie, could you flip to the next slide? We just wanted to share a couple of other artists who are taking contemporary looks at Civil War subjects, in case you were interested in doing some sort of comparisons in your classrooms. The first I want to talk about is Carrie Mae Weems. She created a series called Untitled, and it's the 7 bluish images at the top of the slide. It's a 7-part series of inkjet prints recontextualizing Augustus St. Gaudens's monumental sculpture of the Shaw Memorial and the Massachusetts 54th Regiment. We don't have an image here of the Shaw Memorial, but you can see it in some of the photographs. The original is located in Boston Commons, but we also have a plaster version of the Massachusetts 54th Regiment at the National Gallery of Art. And these images that she created were a memorial and to tell the story of African-American experiences of racial pride, resilience, sacrifice, and discrimination. And then the image that's in the sort of second tier that's kind of dark and a little bit hard to read. This is a photograph by Dawood Bey. And though hard to read in this slide, it depicts a contemporary image of a stop along the Underground Railroad at night. So that we see these places of those seeking freedom, and we see them in the way that they saw them. frequently traveling under the cover of darkness. And there's a whole series of work along this line by Dawood Bay as well. So artists then and now present to us an opportunity to ask questions. Whose stories are being told and why? And also, what are the ongoing impacts of the Civil War and the status of equal treatment of Black Americans? So we just want to thank you so much for going into some difficult conversations and some difficult content, and using art as a catalyst for these discussions. And we want to take just a little time now to pause and reflect on the experience that we've had together. So, Julie, I'll turn it back to you.
Great. So let's reflect on the experience. And we're wondering what qualities of the experience of looking at these images together, talking together, resonated with you. And how might you apply See, Wonder, Connect in your classroom? And then how might looking at photography help students more deeply understand the Civil War and its aftermath? So we invite you to focus on one or any and all of these questions and share your thoughts either on the mic or in the chat. We'd love to hear what you thought.
I teach EB students, and I think them having these pictures help them with one another and help understand what's going on with the pictures by seeing their vocabulary.
You were breaking up a little bit for me, Sylvia, but I think I heard you say that taking time to talk about the photographs, the images, would help to expand students' vocabulary.
Yes, I teach EB students, so having pictures,
okay.
having these pictures helps all students, not just the lower level. It helps them engage in different conversations, which is wonderful.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, I think often works of art are really helpful with sort of language acquisition and building vocabulary. Thank you for that. And in the chat, Julie, there's a couple of comments. It puts students into the place and gives them an opportunity to explore that place as if they were there. Let's see, Liz wrote, we see hundreds of images on a daily basis, but we rarely take the time to practice close looking, taking the time to slow down and really look.
Yes. And Emily shares, I really liked how you walked the audience through evaluating the photographs. Students need to be taught how to think about history and learn how to interpret primary source materials. This is a good way to introduce this to students and scaffold it so that they can eventually do it independently and learn to ask questions. Yes, thank you for sharing that. That is a big goal, primary goal for using thinking routines, and that See, Wonder, Connect routine. That really drove that forward. Great. Are there any pictures of Southern towns before the war and then after the war? We'd have to look into that and maybe follow up with you if you wanted some examples. We'll have our email contacts at the end, and we'd be happy to dig into that with you, Leslie. Kathleen says it puts the students, I think maybe Heidi already read this one, puts the students into that place and gives them the opportunity to explore it. Yes, beautifully said.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
also
wrote that, sorry, I was just going to say, Ed wrote that it fits well with the Black History Month, that he often shows the film Glory to students. Yeah, actually, I love our Shaw Memorial sculpture, and in a minute, we'll point you in the direction of how, if you need any posters, we actually have a beautiful poster of the Shaw Memorial and the Massachusetts 54th Regiment sculpture by Augustus St. Gaudens. We'd love to share that with you. Suzanne wrote, "I agree that I learned way more tonight than can be gleaned from a photo." And Leslie uses photo to teach the Industrial Revolution, and now she'd like to do so with the Civil War. So that's exciting. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much for sharing these reflections. If you have any others, feel free to add those to the chat and we'll read them out. So we'll go ahead and move forward with sharing a little bit about our resources. Oh, let's see. Suzanne says, I meant to say to slow down when looking at a photo. Absolutely. It's amazing how much the thinking, how deeply our thinking and understanding can go when we take a little more time with it. Thank you for sharing that about slowing down. Thank you, Emily, for the positive feedback. That's great. Well, we wanted to just go to kind of a bird's eye view and share a little bit more about the thinking routines. So we have found, Heidi and I and our team of other educators at the National Gallery have really found that thinking routines, which are just these sets of open-ended questions like see, wonder, connect, that those have really helped both adults and students to slow down and to really take ownership of the thinking and the learning. Just like you shared, it's kind of like building those habits for being a lifelong learner. And instead of us kind of feeding the information, it really ignites our own passion for looking and discovering and making meaning of the artwork that we're seeing and that we're looking at. And so the thinking routine we use comes from a research project called Project Zero at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. And so we have used many of these strategies from Project Zero over the years. And there's one special group of thinking routines called artful thinking. And these thinking routines hone in on different types of critical thinking. So we have these up here, and you can probably see, you might notice some of the kinds of critical thinking that we did together this evening. When we were looking at the photographs, we really spent a lot of time observing and describing, and then we moved into questioning and investigating. We didn't jump into making interpretations, but we kind of built on those questions and reasoned a little bit together. We shared some information with you, and we did some comparing and connecting as well, with connecting the information we know with what we're seeing, and also comparing and connecting the two photographs together. And probably in that process, as we were listening to each other, we did a few of these other types of thinking or thinking dispositions that we're seeing here. We might have explored some viewpoints that we didn't already hold. Maybe we heard something new from someone else. Maybe found some layers of complexity as we work together. So these are all different ways that we can develop critical thinking in students by looking at works of art and using thinking routines. So our team actually developed a couple of online courses that we want to tell you about. They are free. They're free for up to 4 months of use. And if you wanted to use it for a whole year, you can sign up for, I think it's around $100 through the edX platform. And these have downloadable image, slide decks, templates. There are all kinds of arts integration lessons that can be used across subjects. It's a self-paced online course, and we have a lot of videos in there that show real teachers working with real groups of students and implementing these routines like we did tonight, in the galleries and also in classrooms. So it's a really wonderful way to kind of immerse in some of this pedagogy and learn some tools for integrating works of art regularly into your classrooms. So we encourage you to check that out. Oh, someone says we cannot see the slide you're pinned, so we only see you talking. Uh-oh.
Sylvia, that might be an issue on your end. You might have switched the slide view and the presenter view. I was able to see it on my end, Julie.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
at the top, there's a thing that says meeting, and then there's a thing that says the screen. And if you're clicked on the screen, you'll see you talking and the screen instead of just you. So
Okay. So I'll go back to that slide for a second, Sylvia. This is the slide. Hopefully you can see it now. And now we'll go forward. So here are the links to some of the resources we offer. And we can drop, let's see, we'll be sure to share this PowerPoint with you so you have access to the links. And Mark, I don't know if you wanted to drop any of these in the chat. So we had one course we created in 2019 called Teaching Critical Thinking Through Art, and that really focuses on observing and describing, reasoning with evidence, and questioning and investigating. So those top 3 circles you saw in our little palette. And then the second one that we just launched focuses on comparing and connecting, exploring viewpoints, and finding complexity. There are social studies themes woven throughout. We also have a few like math lessons. We have a science lesson, some language arts. So we try to gear the courses in such a way that teachers of all subjects would find something relatable. But you can navigate through those modules and check it out. We also have Uncovering America, which is a teaching resource, especially for social studies teachers. And it connects works of art to different themes in social studies curriculum. Is here. You can actually download an image set to use with your class of lots of different Civil War images. And then there's also a set of classroom activities related to the Civil War and its aftermath that you can download. So we really encourage you to do that if Civil War is in your curriculum. And then please sign up for virtual and in-person field trips if you are coming to Washington, D.C. in person. If you're not, we would love to bring a National Gallery experience to your students, and you can sign up for a virtual field trip for them. And we have different themes of those virtual tours for you to choose from. And then last but not least, we would like to encourage you to order free art posters to be sent to your classroom. We actually just developed a brand new set of art posters that are just beautiful. They have educational prompts on the back of them. And in fact, the Shaw 54th Regiment Memorial that Heidi mentioned earlier is one of the posters in the set. So that can be a really wonderful jumping off point for talking about the Civil War and engaging your kids in that conversation. Anything else to add to our resources, Heidi?
No, Julie, I think that was beautiful. And yeah, we have a lot of different teaching content on our website. You know, this is our job. We are there for you. So if there's something you'd like to see that you don't see, just let us know. Any feedback on, our presentation today, we're excited to hear that. We're always learning and growing. History is always evolving. So we want to, do our part and we're excited about the role that art can play, I think, in telling some of these stories. So. Oh, thank you, Kathleen. She's ordered the posters, and Sylvia's going to be bringing students to DC this summer. Love that. If there's anything we can do to support your visit, Sylvia, just reach out. Our emails are right here. We'd be happy to, connect you with sketchbooks and pencils or whatever might be useful. So,